Hello and welcome to Coffee Lovers TV. I'm your host, Joseph Robertson. Starting a little something new here today. When I started doing the show, and I started with Cup of Joe, you can go watch a couple of those episodes. I knew I wanted to find a way to share my passion for coffee and my knowledge and my interest in it with you, and also to help you get into it as well. And so I started that off just so Cup of Joe gives you kind of behind the scenes, and I get to do some of that, and that's fun. And I figured I would probably get into doing like coffee reviews, but I'm not, let's just say I'm not necessarily a big fan of the way coffee reviews are usually done. And I wasn't exactly sure the role that would take here. But then I realized that there's a really fantastic opportunity for me to just kind of introduce you to the space of tasting and discovering coffee. The trick with coffee reviews, of course, is that number one, there's so many different roasters out there. For instance, this coffee by Campos. Campos is from Australia. This is a Kenyan coffee from the coffee's name is Barichu Gatomboya AA. So Barichu is a farmers cooperative, and the region in Kenya it's from is Nairi. The coffee is processed in a wash process. That means that just quick overview. I suppose I should do probably an episode on the production of coffee. But coffee, the coffee seeds that we know of, the coffee beans that we know, this is actually the pit of a stone fruit, much like a cherry. We often call the coffee fruit, we often call them cherries because they're very similar to cherries. So when it comes time to harvest the fruit and get to the pit, to the seeds, the beans as we call them, the farmers must process away the fruit. And there's a number of different ways to do that. Washed is a very common process. And what that means is they take the cherries, usually starts off with some kind of wet mill that essentially separates the cherries from the seeds. You just kind of put the cherries in the top, and a mill essentially crushes the fruit, pushing out the seeds and separating the fruit. And then the seeds are put through a series of washes and fermentation until finally they are set out to dry after they've been washed. And then there's a few other steps after that. On the converse, on the other end, natural processed, the cherries themselves are left out to dry and rot away essentially from the seed. Those processes are usually used, the natural processes are usually used in regions where there's a lot less water. But as people are improving in their production practices, those kind of processes are starting to be used all around the world. Anyways, back to this one. So I kind of went on a little sidebar there, but my point with this particular coffee is whatever I have to say about this coffee pretty much stands for this coffee. And in fact, I don't even think you can get this particular coffee anymore. But even if you could, you may not be able to order the coffee. My point is, as far as coffee reviews go, me reviewing one particular coffee from a you getting it perspective is not necessarily helpful unless, I can provide it to you, for example, and that may be the case sometimes. I can give, I think oftentimes one can gain an impression of like, for instance, coffees from this particular or this exact coffee could be roasted by someone else. That's also possible. it would be a different experience, but similar. That could make a fun show as well, comparing the same coffee done by different roasters. Lots of ideas to do here, but what I realized is that I can at the least give you an understanding of tasting coffee and exploring and that sort of thing, and how I do it. So the first one we're going to do is this Barichu Gatomboya AA Kenyan coffee by Campos. I know that this is no longer available on their website. This was actually roasted. I've held on to it a little while. It's about a month old, but that's just fine. Typically, when you get a fresh roasted coffee, it usually needs to sit for a few days after roasting. That allows some of the more volatile gases to escape. The coffee kind of settles and really gets into this sort of prime window of flavor. That is about 1 to 2 weeks, or 2 to 4 weeks, depending on how you look at it. I think that it's usually safe to say up to a month is fine. If I were to compare this with a week after it was roasted, I'm sure I could tell the difference, but I'm also certain that this is still going to be delicious, so looking forward to that. The other challenge, of course, in communicating on coffee is that one of the biggest influences is how I brew it. And just because I have a particular experience with it doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to be able to replicate it. I can tell you what I did so that you can get pretty close, or certainly spot on, if you're looking to get a coffee I talk about and replicate the experience. I think what I'm going to do for this very first show, I think I'm going to just brew this coffee on the Chemex, since Campos actually will often roast, or at least they sell their coffees separated by sort of how you're going to be brewing them. So if you take a look here, it says filter on here. The idea is that this coffee be prepared in a filter method. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to brew it with the Chemex and then just kind of give you my thoughts as I drink it. So I'm going to go ahead and brew the Chemex of this lovely coffee, and we'll get to it. Oh, actually first, how about I give it a smell? Half of the enjoyment of coffee, of course, at least half, is the aroma. So let's see what we're like. My first impression is a lot of sweetness and deep brown sugary sweetness, and maybe some like fruit pulp. Since it's since we're getting into the fall, I think it would not be out of line to suggest the kind of pulpiness that you might get carving a pumpkin and you're scooping out the pulp. There's something about that. Not that this smells like pumpkin, but that's just kind of what came to my mind. Sweet is definitely strong. And that's mostly what I'm getting out of it. Strong, maybe brown sugary sweetness and pulpiness. It's interesting, the aromas in the bag kind of coalesce. And it's fairly well lightly roasted coffee, it looks like. Looks pretty good. I know at some point maybe I'll be able to do close-ups of the coffees, but it smells like a delicious coffee. Let's go brew it. And we're back. As I said, one of the challenges with this kind of project is that I'm doing the brewing, and you know, I may not be perfect, and in order to get exactly what I'm experiencing, you kind of have to do what I did. But I can tell you that I brewed in the Chemex 27 grams of coffee and about 420 grams of water, which it's about a 16-to-1 ratio. So you'll see in my other videos, I always brew by weight, because that's how you're consistent with your brewing. Coffee, well, I can just pull this out here. Not all coffees are created equal in terms of size. In terms of the size of the beans. Different types of beans are different sizes, and they change size when you roast them depending on how darkly you roast them. So it doesn't really work to brew by volume. Like, I can't really, unless I know exactly how much a tablespoon weighs, I can't really brew with a tablespoon. So I'm also not terribly picky with my brewing technique for the most part, unless I'm playing around, well, not playing around, unless I'm trying to do something very specific. I kind of stick with generalities. I like to explore the sort of nature of shifting in coffee as things change, because the way this tastes this week is not the way it tasted last week. It's not the way it tasted the week before. I try to be fairly precise in my movements. So, you know, I brew by weight, and I go with, you know, in the Chemex I usually go with a 16-to-1 ratio. In this case, that was 27 grams of the coffee and 420 grams of the water-ish. It was around there. I think it was 423. Now we get to try it. It was interesting. The first smell I had, it smelled kind of grassy. That's dissipated. Now I get this really like kind of sweet. Ooh, that changed. There was like a molassesy richness to it, and now it's given away to some kind of fruity sweetness, like roasted peaches or something. I know it can sometimes sound a little absurd when describing coffee, because there's so many possible like aromas and tastes that can be applied to it. I go through a couple different stages. So the initial stage that I go through when I'm doing this is I just try to conjure up from my memory something. On the first aroma, I try to conjure up some kind of memory. See, that sweetness, that rich sweetness is pulling at something. And that's how it always is for me when I'm smelling and drinking coffee. It's always that it pulls at a memory of something, and I can almost grasp what it is. And now it's changed. Now it's gone to this sort of almost like fermented fruit. I like how it's shifting around the aromas. Okay, that's enough smelling. Let's get into tasting. I have to admit, I cheated a little bit. I know what the official tasting notes are for this. I looked them up, and one of them explains the aroma that I smelled before the ground, when I said there was like a pulpiness. There was something else in there. I couldn't put my finger on it, and it's tamarind. And I can't believe I didn't put my finger on it, because I love tamarind. I cook with it all the time, and it has this like tangy sweetness that's really cool. And maybe we'll taste that in here. Maybe we won't. We'll find out. If I was doing like proper tasting here, I would probably behoove me to have some kind of soda water, so that I can kind of clear my palate between sips. But we're just gonna do this with coffee in a cup. See, it just smells like a really good coffee in the cup. I like using this glass mug because you can kind of. I should do like a photo series of different coffees side by side because every one of them has just kind of a different shade. This one has like these really rich red tones to it. That's kind of cool. Kind of get more of that rich redness with lighter coffees, and this is a pretty lightly roasted coffee. Still quite hot. Oh, that is good. I don't even know what I tasted, but it's interesting. I know this is a light coffee, but it's coming off as like a medium in terms of like this. There's this kind of rich sweetness that I would expect from something a little more developed. Oh, there's some tanginess. Ooh, that was like really fresh peaches. Kind of tanginess in the back. Not like it's tasting like peaches, but like that's what popped in my head is the tanginess kind of on the back of my tongue after biting into a fresh peach. That's kind of what I imagined. Ooh. See, I'm getting stone fruit on this. Okay, now this is interesting. So, okay, let me try to explain. So I already explained that when I do my first impression, I kind of try to just sift through memory and kind of let something grab at me. I like doing that at the beginning, and then I try to kind of go through. I should really get my hands on a tasting wheel. There are a lot of flavors that can be used to describe coffee, and there's a tasting wheel. There are a couple tasting wheels that have been designed that really explain that. Now, I've made a coffee tasting 101 guide that I put together as a way to help you learn how to identify what you're tasting in coffee, because it's really just a memory exercise. And I kind of go through a similar process. I kind of go through a similar process when I'm tasting coffee myself. And that's I do the first thing, memory thing first, and then I kind of go around the wheel and I try to figure out. I look at broad terms. So I'm trying to see if it makes me think of citrus, of stone fruit being peaches, cherries, that sort of thing. And does it have kind of like a melon-like flavor to it? There's definitely some kind of fruitiness that's either stone fruit or citrus to me. Especially when I slurp it. It's interesting when I really kind of try to spray the coffee around my palate. It comes off much differently than if I'm just drinking it. Which it's odd. I try to do a mix of those things because it's odd to me describing a coffee that requires me to do this. because who's gonna do that at home? You're just gonna drink it, right? But it does give really good sort of clarity to what is possible. I'm getting a lot of peaches on this. That's really interesting. I wonder if that's because it's further along. You know, it's like I said, this was roasted about a month ago, so some things can have progressed and be a little bit different. So I'll just go kind of around the circle of what I look at. So I look for citrus, I look for stone fruit, like melon, that's kind of in the fruits. I think about floral flavors, tea-like flavors, vegetable-like flavors. There's also chocolates and nuts and different kinds of sweetness. So that's kind of my broad terms that I look at, trying to figure out maybe where it sits. But I could land on something like peach juice. Let's pour some more. I like to come up with sort of compound flavors to describe something, something that is more easily relatable. The official sort of way of describing coffee when we're looking at taste is we look at, and this is based on the SCAA guidelines, so I'm simplifying a little bit, but we look at flavor, we look at acidity, we look at body, we look at aftertaste, we look at sweetness, we look at balance, and a lot of those things you can get really complicated on. I personally like to simplify it a bit and just try to paint a picture that's easily relatable. I could easily see myself drinking this on a morning. I find it quite juicy, actually. And I keep running into this peaches, like peach juice. It's like peach juice to me. Maybe that's because I've had fresh made peach juice a few times this summer, and so it's sort of on my mind still. It's got a nice sweetness to it. It's definitely light, but I could easily see drinking this in the morning. It's not too complex, and I like that. It's sweet and it's delicious. Let me share with you their notes on it. So they had broken it down into acidity, body, and flavors. And the acidity they described as lemon, which I think I could see that maybe a couple weeks in the past, like in its sort of prime window, and maybe even now. And actually, hold on, let me think about that. It's interesting when I take a flavor that has been assigned to this, and like if I say it tastes like well, okay, so if Campos says it tastes like lemons, and or it has lemon acidity, let's say, and I'm drinking it, it's far easier for me to then see that as well. This is often why we taste blind, but I'm not sure I want to do that just yet. We'll get to that later on the show. Okay, so lemon, Tangelo, which I can't conjure up in my head what Tangelo tastes like, and mandarin. To me, this is not. Maybe the like bright tanginess of it could be mandarin, but I'm not hitting mandarin on this for me. The body, I honestly don't understand their body descriptions. Soupy, zesty, and clean. Soupy, not for me. When I think soupy, I think of something thick, and this is pretty crisp to me. Clean, sure. Definitely clean. I think maybe that's kind of related to the aftertaste. It kind of clears off pretty quickly. I got some lingering sort of brightness, kind of like after eating a peach. The flavors they describe: fruity, tamarind, pulpy. I'm actually, I don't get tamarind. I mean, maybe in the brightness of it. Maybe in the tanginess of it, maybe some tamarind. It's okay. And then overall flavors: lemon, citrus, blackcurrant, and molasses. I think that's a fair description. I could definitely see describing this as blackcurrant. And I got a lot of the molasses on the aroma. And there's this nice underlying deep sweetness that fits molasses very well. So that came out a lot more complex and descriptive than I thought that might be. We're going to see how this goes, I think, with sort of reviewing coffees. I think that I want to just kind of explore the coffee world through here. Maybe I'll make a mission to explore all the different regions. I'd like this to be something that kind of helps you in your own journey and discovery in coffee. I'm always happy to answer questions as well. If you have questions, just toss them in the comments, and maybe we can make a show out of questions. Pardon me constantly looking down. I made some notes for myself just to make sure that I covered everything that I wanted to. I guess I could have said a little bit more about Campos at the beginning. I've done some work with Campos in the past. I visited Melbourne in 2014 for the International Coffee Expo, and I met with Brian Desai there of Campos, interviewed him, and had a story about Campos there. They are quite a sizable company in Australia. I understand that they have coffee being served in over 700 cafes in the country. Pretty big roaster, very well known, and they're big on serving, doing direct trade work. So they go to origin all the time, and they get some really great coffees. And I think they do a fantastic job, especially for the size of their operation. To me, this is an excellent coffee here. They do good work. That's nice and sweet. Like peaches. Thanks for watching.